Well, good afternoon or morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar focusing on student mobility and transfer, a national view. I am Kate Springsteen, Project Coordinator of Member and Education Services for the Interstate Passport. This webinar, along with all of our webinars in this series, is being recorded and will be made available at www.wichi.edu/passport/webinars by tomorrow, September 30th. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please type your question into the question box on the GoToWebinar panel, and it will be brought to the presenter's attention. Following this webinar, I will be sending out an email with information on where to find the recording of this webinar, as well as a link to a survey which we would very much appreciate if you would fill out. I'm delighted to introduce you to Afet Dundar, who is the Director of the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. Afet plays a leading role in producing the Research Center's signature report series of national reports on student outcomes in the annual High School Benchmarks Report. Dr. Dundar is responsible for the daily operations of the Research Center, as well as has a leadership role in developing the center's research agenda. She has contributed to numerous publications on student access and success outcomes. Prior to joining the Clearinghouse, Dundar was Assistant Director for Research at the Project on Academic Success at Indiana University. Welcome, Afet.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you for everyone for joining this webinar at the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. We are always excited to talk about our findings, results, different results from our numerous reports that we publish throughout the year. And today we are here to talk about mobility and transfer. I do want to say I think most of you know about NSC and the data we hold and the data we do research with. We do have the website at the end of the slides where you can get even more information. And I'll just say a couple of sentences before we go to the slides that Clearinghouse receives the data from all colleges and universities directly, and the coverage rate is 97% when we look at all institutions, and for public schools it is even higher, about at 99%, whether it's 4-year public or 2-year public institutions. We receive both enrollment data and degree data, so really the strength of the data is ability to follow students wherever they go. They transfer within the state, across state lines. So that's one of the biggest strengths of the data, to do that longitudinal study with the data. I have a picture here that somewhat depicts what we think about how we see the mobility and transfer pathways. You might, you have your own experience. You might think this is a little bit exaggerated version or not, but we look at the whatever report we have done in the last few years. We have seen these multiple institution attendance patterns, mobility and transfer in every report. Just a couple of weeks ago, we published time to degree report where we saw of all bachelor's degree recipients who received their degree in 2014-15, 64% of them attended more than one institution. And we have seen this mobility in our college completion reports, in the reports that specifically focus on mobility and transfer. We don't look at the transfer of credits in these reports per se, but we see the mobility, where they started and what other schools they attended while they were in post-secondary education system. For example, in our annual college completions report, this is the results here on your screen is from fall 2008 entering cohort results, where we saw that within 6 years, about 1/5 of the completions that took place within 6 years of starting in a college happened in a school where they did not start. It happened elsewhere. And whether it's 4-year public, this is a starting institution, whether they started in 4-year public institution or 4-year private nonprofit. And when we follow students beyond 6 years, when we follow them 8 years, that completions elsewhere increases actually from 1/5 to 1 in 4 students completions happening elsewhere. Probably reasonable, probably intuitive, because transfers, when they transfer, it takes longer to get a degree. At two-year institutions, it is 1/3 of the starting cohort who completed a degree. 1/3 of all completions for community college starters happen elsewhere. When we include those who received their degree elsewhere after receiving a degree in their starting institution, it actually jumps to 1/2 of all completions. On this bar, you see 16.4% and 8.2% so it's about half of 50% that actually happens for those who start in 2-year. Half of all the completions for 2-year public starters happen elsewhere when we include the degrees that happened before, after they got a degree in their starting institution. This is one of our snapshot reports. This is where we are looking at students who received a degree from a 4-year institution and how many of them attended a community college before receiving that degree in a 4-year school. And in all, 46% of the students completing a degree at a 4-year institution had some type of enrollment, whether it was 2 terms, 3 terms, or more, had previous community college enrollment. What it really means is if you are in a community college, your institution is likely contributing to the success of up to half of the bachelor's degree students in your state. And if you are a 4-year institution, you're likely relying on a lot of transfer student enrollment, students who come from community colleges. But among those who start in a 2-year institution, only 15% complete a 4-year degree within 6 years. So this looks at the fall 2009 entering cohort. The cohort started in a community college, and 6 years later, 15% of them had a degree from a 4-year school. So throughout multiple reports, a number of reports we have done, we have seen mobility as a factor in student access and success. In fact, conventionally, we would think about mobility and transfer happening in a particular direction, in one direction. Students start in a community college and go to a 4-year institution. But in all our reports, what we have seen, it can be a factor, and in most of the cases, a success factor in student secondary or academic career. These are low income and in different directions. For example, low-income, minority, and first-generation college students are more likely to begin at a community college, and they would start in a community college and go to a 4-year school. That is a factor in their access and success. Additional coursework at lower costs in community colleges for those students who start in 4-year schools, and we have seen it in our reports where students start in a 4-year school and for one reason or another, they go and enroll in a 2-year school with or without return to their starting school. Bachelor's degree attainment for community college students who transfer to a 4-year institution. In one of our reports, when we looked at the transfer students, 6 years later, what percentage of the transfer students had a bachelor's degree? It was 62%. And if they came with an associate degree, if they had an associate degree, 6 years later, 72% of them had a bachelor's degree. The average was 62, which included those who also transferred without an associate degree. We also have reverse transfer of credits from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions. Really, a lot of talk about this happened in recent years, where students start in a community college, go to 4-year school, but before receiving their bachelor's degree, they can transfer their credits from 4-year school to the community college they previously attended to receive their associate degree. lateral transfer for better institutional or program fit. And we have seen in later slides, we'll actually see the transfer rates that happen for 2-year starters and 4-year starters, and what proportions of them happen at our lateral transfer from one 4-year to another, or from one 2-year to another 2-year school. And community college swirl, what we call swirl in this context is the when they attend a community college, they are in 4-year, they go to community college, and then they come back to 4-year school, actually. As I mentioned earlier, in every single report, regardless of the topic of the report, we observe these multiple institution attendance. But we also have a mobility and transfer report that we do every 3 years, and the very last one we published in summer 2015, where we specifically looked at the first-time cohort of students who started in fall 2008, 3.6 million first-time students entering college. And we counted all their transfer and mobility events within 6 years, and defined, and I want to mention this, that we were not looking at the credit transfer. That's why we call it mobility and transfer, because actual credit transfer may or may not happen. We define the mobility here in this report. We define it as enrollment in a new institution at any time within the 6 years with no concurrent enrollment at the starting institution, and it should have happened before they received a bachelor's degree, a 4-year degree. And concurrent enrollment, so those students who went to another school, but they were concurrently enrolled in their starting institution is not counted in this transfer rate. And we do, what is mobility, what is transfer? It could be a difficult measure to measure, and these are the definitions or decisions we made in this report. So I do have a few things from that report here. In that report, 2015 report, we found that well over 37.2% of the starting cohort enrolled in a different institution at least once within 6 years. And of all who changed their institution, almost half of them changed more than once. They attended at least twice, which means 3 institutions, including the starting institution. They attended 3 institutions within 6 years. And I have another number here, 19% actually of all the transfers were 3 times or more. And if it is 3 times, it involves 4 schools, including the starting school. So, and we looked at this number we have, we found it really very interesting. We counted all the transfers for every individual in the entering cohort within 6 years. And we counted all the multiple moves that we saw. And 3.6 million students made 2.4 million transitions. We call them transitions because, again, we're not looking at the transfer of the credit per se. 3.6 million students, 2.4 million transitions from one institution to another within 6 years. So the student educational pathways are growing longer and more complex, and they comprising multiple institutions for all kinds of reasons. And at the institutions, you will have actually a lot more and a lot better information about the reasons why they might be transferring out of your institution or in your institution. This is I mentioned 37.2%. That was for the entire starting cohort. On this slide, I have a few percentages for students who started in a particular institution type. The very first one is for those students who started in 2-year public institutions. And we have over 39% of the entering cohort transfers to to another institution. And the differentiation we are making there, 35.6% of the transfers were before receiving any degree, any credential from that starting two-year institution. 3.9% transferred after they received a credential, degree, or certificate in their starting two-year school. The other bars show students who started in four-year schools. The first one is those who started in four-year public schools. And second is four-year private nonprofit and four-year private for-profit. Interestingly, I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar that most of the time, perhaps before we were thinking about transfer in terms of starting in a community college and going to a four-year school. But what we see among all those who start in four-year school, they also move to another institution. 36, more than 1/3 of those who started in public institution, they move to another school. And very similar percentage for those who started in private, four-year private nonprofit institutions. And finally, we have about 23% of private, those who started in private for-profit institutions change their institution at least once within 6 years. And here is another set of numbers that actually show those transfers, whether they happen within the state or across state lines. They go to another. When they change their institution, they also change their school. I should mention that here, the state is the state of the institution, not the state of the student. It's not, the starting state is not the home state. It is where they started, the state of the starting school. And we have, for those who start in two-year public institutions, of all the transfers happened, 18.5%, 1 in 5, changed the state. And for those in four-year public schools who started in four-year public schools and transferred elsewhere, if we take all the transfers, that's 36% that we saw in the previous slide. If we look at the distribution, it's almost in 1 in 4, 24% changed the state, changed also the state when they changed the institution. Even higher numbers, we observe even higher numbers for private nonprofit four-year and private for-profit schools. You may think about, we have heard this comment that for private nonprofit four-year, it could be that actually the starting school was not students' home state, and when they change their institution, they come actually back to their home state. But again, we are not capturing here that one. We are looking at the change of the state of the starting institution and institution. Here are the similar results by state, and the darker colors are capturing the states, which is states. Nationally, 19% of all students who change, community college students who change their institution, we saw it in on the previous slide, they changed also the state. For which state, the percentages out of state as a proportion of all transfers, all changes, is a little higher. It's on the average is 30%, except California. California does not have, only about 10% of all transfers is out of state. California usually has, in a number of reports we have seen that they do have comparable total transfer rates, but the out of state is usually a small proportion of all transfers. And you may not see some of the states here, and that would be because because they start from community colleges. If a particular state had fewer than 3 schools, we wouldn't usually publish their results. That would be one reason why you may not see, if you later look at this slide, you may not see a few states on this slide. when we look at the mobility and transfer rate by enrollment intensity, and I should mention that many of you probably are familiar how we define enrollment intensity. We have very good, well-populated enrollment intensity indicator for all the enrollments. And in fact, we receive enrollment status for more than once in a semester, so we are capturing the final enrollment status for every term. Here, conventionally, enrollment intensity is defined as enrollment status in the very first term when students start. If they are full-time, they are defined as full-time students. If they are part-time, they are in part-time. And usually part-time students really don't get any outcomes reported in conventional measures. We take all the students who started in first-time cohort, and we define enrollment intensities a little bit different categories. We look at students who enrolled full-time until they received a degree or until their last enrollment. And if they are always full-time, we put them in a category of exclusively full-time students. If they had always part-time status, and in NSC, again, we don't really have a part-time status, we have full-time status and less than full-time, such as half-time, less than half-time, really more granular enrollment status data we have in clearinghouse data. Enrollment status is really very detailed. It's not just full-time, part-time, but we group them together, all the less than full-time statuses together as a category, and if they never had a full-time status, we put them in exclusively part-time group. And then we have mixed enrollment students, and mixed enrollment students usually in every first-time cohort, more than half of the cohort are mixed enrollment students. They either start full-time, then they become part-time, or they start part-time and then they switch to full-time, or they do this switch multiple times, not only once. Depending on the life situations, perhaps if they have other responsibilities, they would drop to less than full-time status, and when they are able financially and time-wise, they would go back to full-time status. So what we see here, mixed enrollment students are the most mobile. They change their institution. In fact, I said more than half of the first-time cohort is usually mixed enrollment students, and we see similar, and more than half of them actually change their institution at least once. And it's possibly when they change the institution. We always think about it, which one, not always clear the cause-effect direction. They transfer to a different school. Maybe that's the point where they decide to enroll in a different status, or enrolling in a different status because they wanted to enroll in different status. They changed their institution. So not clear, but what we see, mixed enrollment students have the most mobility in terms of the percentage of them changing their starting institution. And part-time students, these are exclusively part-time students. They're less mobile. And our explanation usually for that is that these are the students also are typically perhaps a little older. They might be constrained by their jobs, by their family. They're more likely to have reasons for enrolling part-time, and those reasons may also constrain them in terms of how flexible they are in terms of changing their institutions or changing their programs. So in most of our reports, this is what we observed, that exclusively part-time students will have the least rate of transfer and mobility. And here I'm summarizing really what I just mentioned. Older students least likely to transfer, most likely to enroll part-time. Veterans 2 to 3 times more mobile than other adult students. Mixed enrollment, and I mentioned about it quite a bit already, maybe a result of mobility as much as a cause. Here, this is the slide that shows really the destination of destination institution, the institution type of the destination institution. we see the starting institutions in the lower part, and then where they went. You may remember the numbers. We had 39% of students who started in two-year institutions. They changed their institution at least once. And here we see the percentages that went to a four-year school and the percentage that went to another two-year school as a lateral transfer. So 15%. It's not a small number. 15% of the starting cohort, when they changed their institution, it was actually a lateral transfer. 24, one in four, almost 1 in 4, when they of the starting cohort starting in 2 year, when they changed their institution, they went to a 4-year school. For those who started in 4-year schools, it's almost the same percentage. It's half and half. We saw on the previous slide about 1/3 of the students who start in 4-year school, they change their institution at least once, and half of them, 17%, go to on a lateral transfer to another 4-year school. Another 17.2 go to a 2-year school, and 17.9% go on a lateral transfer to another 4-year school. Okay. This is a little bit busy slide. It simply shows really it's a little bit complicated, and our executive director calls this slide the statistical version of the highway interchange. The first slide that we saw on the picture that we saw on the first slide. This shows the pathways. This shows the starting institution and the destination institutions where they went. And what we saw in this report, really, community colleges are the top destination for pretty much for everyone, regardless of where they started. They're not top destination for those who started in 2-year public institutions, but they are second, actually, destination for even those students who started in community colleges. And about the year and why the year is important. This is throughout all our reports. Our goal is really show the pathways, how complex they are, and also when these changes happen, the patterns in enrollment, the decision to enroll in a different school. And this slide really shows that the timing of the transferring to a different institution. And this really shows by timing and also destination institution. What we see in our transfer and mobility reports, that the second year, and I should mention that year is defined from the starting year. If this is 2008 cohort, the first year is going to be August 2008 to August 2009. The second year is from August 09 to August 10, and etc. So what we see here, the majority of the transfers happen, really a lot of transfers happen in the second year. And third year is also there. Quite a bit happens in the third year. But interestingly, we see students changing their institutions in the 4th and 5th and even 6th years. The year 6 after they started somewhere. And this is some piece of information that institutions would think about, how why these transfers, these late changes happen, for what reasons, and how the school who receives those students can be helpful for those students. From here, I specifically will focus a little bit about the transfer student success, that we looked at in one of our reports. But I want to say a few things about how throughout the research, not only research that NSC Research Center did, but also overall the literature tells us that transfer and mobility are common, but there's still a lot to understand about it. It's difficult for students to do, and there's a lot to understand how it happens, the transitions. One research, for example, says only 60% of the students who intend to pursue a bachelor's and who completed 60 or more credits at a community college actually transfer to a four-year institution. And this paper also talks about what percentage of them lose their credits while they transition to another school. And we have this 14% lose more than 90% of their credits number here. And in our own report, I mentioned in one of the previous slides, 62% of those who transfer complete a bachelor's degree within 6 years after transferring. So they are quite successful, and we'll talk about in a subsequent slide. But how many of them are able? Those who intend to transfer are able to transfer. And this is what we saw in the previous slide. This is a report that we did. We published specifically on community college students who transferred from 2-year schools to 4-year schools, and what percentage of them received a degree. In one of our college completions report, we have seen that 15% of the students who started a 2-year institution completed it at a 4-year school within 6 years. This specific report that I'm going to talk a little bit more in subsequent slides, it looks at the transfer students, those who transferred at the same time in a particular year, and we are looking at 6 years later how many of them had actually a degree and what kind of enrollment behaviors they had that corresponded to certain success. Out of all who started in this report, we looked at the students, this is 356,000 students, who transferred from 2-year to a 4-year school. And 67% of them went to a 4-year public institution, 21% went to a private nonprofit, a 4-year private nonprofit institution, and 10.11% of them went to a private for-profit institution. These are some numbers about their success rate 6 years later. Those students who transferred, 62%, about 62% completed at a 4-year institution. And we see the numbers who were still enrolled at the end of the 6th year, about 8% of all transfers. 6 years later, they were still in a 4-year school. We see 4% of them, which means after they transferred to 4-year school, they went back to a 2-year school and completed there. And 27%, 26.6% of them, 6 years later, they did not have a degree and they were not enrolled anywhere. This is kind of interesting for people to know the difference. The transfer may happen after they receive the associate degree or 2-year degree or certificate, and without. And in a college completion report we have done, we saw that a lot of transfers actually from 2-year to 4-year school happen before students receive an associate degree. And in ends, we actually see that too. Out of 356,000 students that were in the cohort, almost 2/3 of them, 205,000 of them transferred without receiving any degree, and 1/3 of them had a 2-year credential. But in terms of the success rate, those who transferred to a 4-year school with a 2-year degree or certificate, they had higher success rates. 6 years later, 62% of them had a degree from 4-year school, versus those who transferred to a 4-year school without any credentials, they had 56%. The blue part shows that they didn't have a degree at the end of the 6th year, but they were still enrolled in a 4-year school. They did not stop out or drop out yet at that point. These are some success rates by the type of the 4-year schools that they went. If they went to a 4-year public school, 65% of them had a degree from 4-year school 6 years later. If they went to a private nonprofit, a 4-year private nonprofit school, 60.2% had a degree. And if they went to a private for-profit school, they had 35.1% of them had a degree from a 4-year school 6 years after transfer. This is 6 years after transfer, not 6 years after starting in any school. This shows, I have here timing, but what we mean here really, we looked at, a lot of times we hear stop outs really impact students' success rates. And we looked at here, they all transferred in the same year, but we looked separately those who transferred from 2-year school to 4-year school within 1 year of attendance enrollment in 2-year school, and those who left and more than 1 year after they came to a 4-year school. And their success rates are really dramatically different that we saw here. If they enrolled in 2-year and with no stop out or within 1 year of enrolling in 2-year, they went to a 4-year, 66.3% of them had a 4-year degree 6 years later, versus 40% of them if they came to a 4-year school after more than 1 year of stop out. This could be different things. This could be related if they, and we are not looking really at how many years were. So we are not differentiating more than 1 year group, whether they came back after 5 years, 10 years. So if there were a lot of those students, it's possible they lost their credits, and that's why 6 years was not enough for them to receive a degree. That's why we see only 40% of them having a degree 6 years later. Here is looking at the associate degree earners in different ways. This is one of our snapshot reports where we looked at all associate degree earners, including those who don't transfer. So the denominator has all the associate degree earners, and 41% of them had a bachelor's degree within 6 years of receiving an associate degree. And the pie chart shows how it differs by age, associate degrees awarded by age. And also the bar chart shows those, of course, the percentage, those who at the time of the associate degree, if they were 20 or younger, 61% of them had a bachelor's degree 6 years later. Those who were 21 to 24, 43% of them. And adult learners, what we call adult learners, those who were over 24 when they received the associate degree, only 31% of them had a bachelor's degree 6 years after receiving an associate degree. These are the same results, again, by state, and if you have a chance, you can go to our website, and if you get a chance, you can go, this is snapshot 19. This is about associate degree recipients who received a bachelor's degree 6 years later, and we have state results tables in that under that snapshot. You can actually look at specifically the results for your own state. And what we see just from this slide, they of course vary widely on this measure. Some of them have higher percentage of their associate degree earners receiving a bachelor's degree 6 years later. This is from our undergraduate degree earners report, and this is really about what you can call stackable credentials, or again the pathways of the students. A growing number of students who earn a bachelor's degree in a particular year, they are starting actually with an associate. So if you look at the growth over years, percent of all bachelor's recipients, the growth is really small, but if we look at separately number of bachelor's degree recipients who had a prior associate degree, average annual growth rate is 5%. This is again, it's undergraduate degree earners report that we just started publishing this past year, and we plan to do it on an annual basis. As more students start at community colleges, fewer are completing bachelor's degree. We have observed it in 3 reports that we did with fall 2007 cohort, fall 2008, and fall 2009, where the starting cohort was increasing, especially these are recession years, and the enrollments went up in those years. We have observed in our reports that. But the percentage of students who started in community colleges who completed a bachelor's degree within 6 years of starting went actually down over these 6 years. Perhaps as a system, we have not done well by these students, and it can be for different reasons. Some reasons might be legitimate headwinds, reductions in state funding, and again, you will have a lot better context, a lot better information about these reasons in your states. Overcrowding, reduced affordability, perhaps. But it's also what we are thinking, and I think you are thinking, that clear pathways, and research tells us clear pathways, better advising, better articulation, making transfers or transitions smoother, we're thinking that can help with this. And of course, passports will be a big part of it, making that transfer smoother for students. And with that, I think this was my last slide. I am open for the questions.
Well, thank you, Afet. That was a really great presentation. So we would like to take some questions at this point. If you do have any, please write them into the questions box on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll wait just a few moments to see if we get any more questions in. I did have a question during the webinar concerning slide 14. The percentages don't seem to add up to 100 was the question.
Right. It could be possibly that the initial cohorts, when we did initial oh, this was, yeah, this is, I'm sorry, this is separate. They're not meant to add up. This takes all students who mixed enrolled, what percentage transferred, all who were full-time, what percentage transferred, and all who were exclusively part-time, what percentage of them transferred.
Okay. Okay.
So they're not meant to add up to 100. Yeah, the denominators in each case is different. All right.
Great. And then there's another question about why transfer rates weren't included for Utah on slide 13. Could you go over that real quick?
Yes, sure. I actually mentioned it. I didn't specifically mention Utah, but if the starting state sector combination has fewer than 3 schools, we wouldn't publish the results. And most probably Utah had that case.
Three. Did you say 2-year schools?
Correct. In this particular case, yes, I think it is the starting denominator was from community colleges. But in any research we are doing, if the state sector combination has fewer than 3 schools, we do not publish the results.
All right, great. Okay, so I'm going to go on mute for a minute and wait for any other questions to come in. Okay, so I haven't received any more questions. I would like to remind everyone that I will be sending out an email where you can find the URL on how to access a recording of this webinar, and that email will also contain a survey, and we would very much appreciate it if you would fill that survey out. I want to thank Afet again one more time for her presentation, and thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.